As a former paramedic, I once responded with police and fire crews to a report of a person down by the railroad tracks. This was in a wooded area about 500 yards from the nearest access road. A railroad worker conducting a routine safety check had spotted the man. We all arrived, parked, and carried our equipment 500 yards to the scene. The man showed no signs of life. His EKG was flat and his pupils were fixed and dilated. After a thorough examination, we noted no visible signs of trauma. His body was still warm and rigor mortis hadn't set in, indicating he hadn't been deceased for too long. There were no signs of drug use, and the railroad worker confirmed that no trains had passed in the last 8 hours. We searched the area and discovered a makeshift campsite where the man had apparently been living. There were no medications or anything unusual at the site. We were close to an area rumored to be haunted and associated with occult activities. Despite the rumors, none of us had ever witnessed anything out of the ordinary. We waited for the funeral home to arrive and transport the body to the morgue for an autopsy as night fell. That's when strange things began happening. A few of us heard what sounded like distant whispering, though it seemed to come from no specific direction. Some of the guys thought we were playing tricks on them, but soon the whispering stopped. Instead, those who hadn't heard the whispers started hearing what sounded like children's laughter. It was coming from all around us with no clear source. Those who had heard the whispers never heard the laughter. This unsettling phenomenon lasted about 10 to 15 minutes while we stood near the body. The police on the scene urged the dispatcher to accelerate the funeral home's response. We quickly assisted in loading the body and left the area as swiftly as we could. We visited the morgue to discuss the cause of death with the coroner in the following afternoon. The first thing the coroner asked was why we had cleaned the body. My partner and I exchanged puzzled glances and asked him to clarify. He said the scene must have been very bloody, but we informed him there was no blood visible at the scene. The coroner grew pale and said that only added to the mystery, as the body had no blood in it whatsoever. There were no apparent marks where the blood could have been drained. He also mentioned experiencing something unusual during the autopsy, but declined to elaborate. The true cause of death remains a mystery to this day. One evening, I responded to a call about a suspicious individual at a house near my location. When I arrived, the homeowner described a strange encounter. Someone had knocked on his door, and when he opened it, he saw a woman standing in his driveway holding a grotesque child-sized doll with horns. The doll was covered in what looked like blood and cuts. The bewildered homeowner asked the woman what she wanted. She turned to face him and said that the doll needed food. She then let out a terrifying scream and charged toward him. Naturally, he slammed the door shut and called for help. When I got to the scene, there were clear scratch marks on the door and a significant amount of blood, presumably from the woman's fingers. I called for a search to begin, so a couple of units came to patrol the area while I conducted a foot search. Not long after, we received a report that the woman had returned to the house, but she was in the backyard this time. I hurried back and entered the backyard with a flashlight in hand. The area was dark, but I spotted the woman huddled in a corner beside the eerie doll. I approached and asked if she was all right, but she remained silent. As one of the patrol units arrived, their headlights illuminated her figure. This revealed her disheveled appearance. She had long tangled black hair and tattered clothes. She had no shoes, and she looked like she had been living rough. She was murmuring something to the doll, but her words were indecipherable. My partner and I tried to communicate with her, but she continued whispering and was unresponsive to our attempts. Deciding to remove her from the scene, we reached out to restrain her. The moment we touched her, she erupted into violent resistance. She was punching and kicking us, and she was flailing in all directions. Despite our efforts, she was incredibly strong and difficult to subdue. During the struggle, she managed to break free and assumed a crouched position. Her head tilted unnaturally as she emitted a chilling growl. Suddenly, she let out a piercing scream and charged at us. To protect ourselves, my partner delivered a direct punch to her face and knocked her out cold. We quickly handcuffed her and transported her to the hospital where she tested positive for PCP and various opiates. She faced charges of assaulting an officer, resisting arrest, and trespassing. It was reported that she was institutionalized due to a severe mental health disorder, though the specifics were not disclosed to us. My sister is a police officer, and she shared this story with me that I can't seem to forget. It will stick with me forever. She was responding to a domestic disturbance in a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of Chicago. Neighbors reported loud screaming and banging on the second floor for over an hour before everything went silent. Being a rough neighborhood, they didn't call until they noticed a terrible smell. So my sister and her partner approached the door, knocked, and got no response except for a faint whimpering. Finding the door unlocked, they entered. The living room was in disarray with furniture overturned. The TV was shattered and there were several holes punched in the walls. So far it seemed like a typical domestic situation, but they had to clear the apartment as there were reports of 2 people involved, and so far they had found no one. They moved to the bedroom and turned the handle. Instead of the door swinging open, my sister ended up pushing against it with her shoulder because something was blocking it. At this point, she had an idea of what to expect, so she gave her partner a knowing look and shoved the door open. A dog scurried out, its white fur stained with red. Behind the door lay the woman involved in the argument. She was slumped against it, half-seated. She was barely recognizable as a piece of the bed frame had been used to bludgeon her repeatedly. They surveyed the room and found bloody handprints everywhere, originating from the bed and tracing a chaotic path around the room. Smears of blood and handprints covered the window and its locks, which are evidence of her desperate attempts to escape and scream for help. A few broken fingernails lay on the sill and the floor below. The window had been nailed shut, which is a common precaution in such a neighborhood, so it was impossible to open. The handprints circled the room along with several face prints from where her head had been smashed against the walls. All of it was leading to her final resting place beside the door. There were bite marks on her face where the dog, driven by hunger, had started to eat the remains after the brutal attack. The attacker was never caught. Investigation revealed that it was a live-in boyfriend who had been supplying her with drugs. The dog was taken to a shelter and eventually found a loving home. Many years ago, we received a call to assist the sheriff's office with a burglary in progress out in the county. Our radios couldn't communicate with their radios, so their dispatch telephoned ours, who then relayed the details to us. This left us with minimal information and no clear destination, so I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling crawling up my spine as I sped through the dark. It took us about 30 minutes to reach the scene. The house was shrouded in darkness. We soon discovered that the suspect had cut the power supply days earlier and had been living in the house while the family of 4 was away on vacation. As we approached the front door, I heard a man's voice shouting,
"Please leave my house."
I entered with caution and found a young man who appeared mentally unstable. He was covered in dirt with an unkempt beard and wild eyes. He was muttering loudly and rapidly, and he's not making any sense.
"I was sent. I'm supposed to be here. This is the place. This is the promised place. You'll be sorry."
He was not responsive to any of our questions and commands. Thankfully, he did not resist when I put handcuffs on him. It was as if he was staring right through me while I questioned him and searched his backpack. I felt a deep unease despite being much larger than him. I didn't even want to put him in the back of my car, fearing what he might do. His backpack was filled with strange items, including a hunting knife, clothes that didn't fit him, mail with various addresses and names, and a children's math book. He also had a notebook with incoherent writing and drawings of strange creatures. It was all just bizarre. A county deputy eventually arrived and took him away, and I never heard anything more about the incident. I'm a military police officer, so I've had experience in both law enforcement and corrections. In corrections, our main office also served as the police services desk. I remember that the phone would ring often with no one on the other end. My fellow officers told me that these are just normal and there's nothing to worry about. One time, the phone office rang and instead of a number, it displayed a descriptor that I don't remember exactly. It was something like emergency phone number 12. Being new, I immediately contacted my superiors about it. They told me to drop it and never report such calls again. It's pretty eerie, right? Anyway, a few years have passed after that. I was on patrol and I was dispatched to an abandoned part of the base in response to an emergency phone call. There was no specific location given to me because the dispatcher was new to the base, and they didn't know where emergency phone 12 exactly was. They also had not received the memo not to report such calls. The dispatcher mentioned that the caller sounded frantic and claimed they were being chased. This meant someone had actually been on the other end of the line. After some digging, the dispatcher found old maps and relayed the information to me and my partner. We rushed to the site. When we arrived, there was no phone or radio on site. It's just a broken pole where one had once been. That was an interesting one to report. I've had a few unsettling moments in my career as a cop, but one has always stood out to me. It was a call I had when I worked the graveyard shift at around 2 a.m. in the dead of winter. The air was freezing that night and we received a call from dispatch about an open call with a woman faintly whispering, "Help me," before the line went silent. My partner and I arrived at the apartment to find the door slightly ajar. We braced ourselves for the worst as we saw a blood smear on it. The inside was pitch black and eerily quiet. We proceeded with caution. Felt like stepping into a horror movie. The first thing that caught our attention was a large arterial spray on the wall, which then smeared down a hallway and disappeared towards the back of the apartment. As we made our way down the hall, blood was smeared along the walls leading to a bedroom. The door handle was covered in blood. We opened the door and saw a motionless figure on the bed. Blood was covering both the bed and the body. The silence in the apartment was unnerving, and it's almost unbelievable that all the blood came from just one person. We checked the body and found a faint pulse. The woman was still alive. Turned out she was blind and had other health issues. She had a shunt in her arm which she had accidentally pulled out, and that caused her to bleed profusely. For those wondering, she survived the incident. Though it happened more than 10 years ago, I still remember the chilling, quiet, and stale atmosphere of the apartment on that bitterly cold night. My friend is a police officer in a major Canadian city. One night, we had plans to go out after his shift. He decided to pick me up in his patrol car since he was nearly done with his shift and just needed to return the car to the depot. On the way, he got a call about someone hearing strange noises coming from their basement. Noises that sounded like a person. He figured he'd make this his last stop and asked me to wait in the car while he talked with the homeowner and checked it out. He was gone for about half an hour and returned with a look of astonishment and fear on his face. Apparently the homeowner had been hearing loud thuds from his basement for a few weeks, but that day they were particularly loud and frightening. Thinking someone might have broken in, the homeowner called the police. My friend went down to the basement with the homeowner. The basement was completely dark, and the lights had to be turned on from the electrical panel. As they reached the panel, my friend said he saw something out of the corner of his eye. At the end of a hallway that led to a cold storage room, he saw a man standing there and facing the door of the cold storage. He shouted at the man to turn around, but the figure didn't move. The homeowner saw him too and was terrified. My friend asked the man to turn around once more before flipping the switch for the lights. The instant the lights came on, the figure vanished. My friend swore he searched every inch of that basement but found no one there. The homeowner was visibly shaken and decided to stay with a friend for the night. My friend called for another officer to keep an eye on the house to see if anyone tried to enter the property again. I'm not sure what happened after that, but my friend is adamant he saw someone in that basement. Please drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more horror stories.